Jekielek. I'm a senior editor with the Epoch Times newspaper and digital media. I'm also the host of a show called American Thought Leaders, where we cover this issue very, very prominently. I'll describe what the session is about, and then I'll explain who is up here with us. Of course, some of them you know very well. Without religious freedom, what's left? Religious persecution is wholly alien to the principles of the United States. The idea that a person could be barred from worshiping as God was part of the tyranny over the mind of man, against which Thomas Jefferson swore eternal hostility. And the First Amendment protects Americans' free exercise of religion. Around the world, vicious persecution of religious minorities persists. What is the Trump administration doing to protect religious dissenters in countries less free than our own? And what more can be done? This is the theme of the talk. So it's a real honor for me to introduce the distinguished panel here. And of course, we'll have to start with Ambassador Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. So I think actually the top authority in the nation on this issue, probably. And I'll describe a few things. Sam Brownback was sworn in as Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom in February of 2018. He was the governor of Kansas. Previously, he was a U.S. Senator. He was in the U.S. House of Representatives. Basically, he's been serving the nation for quite some time. I might actually add one sort of personal note. In our media company, there's a company called NTD, and back in the time when Sam Brownback was a senator, he actually helped keep NTD television, which is the essentially radio-free Europe for China, on the air, broadcasting via satellite directly into China by beginning a very important co-signed letter that got NTD more of this very, very crucial carriage time on satellite. So I'm very aware of it. We're very aware of your work. Beside Sam, we have Asra Nomani. Asra Nomani is a journalist, author, and activist. She was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and a close friend of reporter Daniel Pearl, an American journalist who was kidnapped and murdered in Pakistan in 2002. So she's been working very hard over the years to uncover the true story behind Pearl's death. She is currently working on a book about the stealth network that radicalizes Islam in the West. Beside her is Todd Starnes. Todd is a longtime award-winning journalist and radio commentator whose writings and commentary regularly reach millions. He's a frequent speaker at churches, Christian conferences, and Christian universities. And he is the recipient of the regional RTNDA Edward R. Murrow Award and the Associated Press Mark Twain Award for storytelling. And finally, at the end of the panel, we have Sander Gerber with Hudson Bay Capital. He's the CEO and Chief Investment Officer. It's a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund that invests in markets worldwide. And he has a long history of engagement in international issues. He is the awarded GINSA's 2017 Henry M. Scoop Jackson Distinguished Service Award for championing the Taylor Force Act, which you might be familiar with, this big anti-terrorism bill back in the day. And in 2008, President Bush appointed him as the Gerber Vice Chairman of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Okay, so we shall begin now. And I think we have to, of course, start with Ambassador Brownback. Let's ask the question, what is the Trump administration doing to protect religious dissenters in countries less free than our own now?
Well, let me start by first thanking you all for being here and for having this topic at CPAC, and also noting I'm reading a book right now on Reagan the Crusader and him being his crusade against communism for years and years and years. And he, in this book, is talking about how much he loved CPAC. Which I thought when I read that, I love CPAC too. It is a great place. It also made me think that if he were alive right now, he'd be doing everything he could against the Chinese Communist Party. of what's taking place. And this administration is pushing hard against them. What the Trump administration is doing is really defending this right in a multiple set of ways and doing it more than any administration has previously. We consider this a God-given human right, not one that's given by governments. And one of my prayer intercessors that prays for me talks about this being God's freedom. Religious freedom is God's freedom. It's one he gave us to choose as we would choose. And whatever that choice might be, whether we get it right or wrong, we're given that right. So recently, we've announced alliance on this, an International Religious Freedom Alliance of 27 nations to push on this topic. We held the first ever UN General Assembly event where the president hosted this on religious freedom, brought countries together to talk about it. We've hosted the first ever ministerials where we bring foreign ministers together. Last year and the year before, we had 100 foreign ministers. It was the largest human rights event ever done at State Department, and it was the largest religious freedom event ever held. This year it'll be in Poland. I say all that, and we've gotten people out of jail. We got Andrew Brunson out of a Turkish prison, which was a big push that it took. It took putting tariffs on aluminum and steel coming out of Turkey into the United States before they would let him go, but the president did it. Nobody had ever put tariffs on a fellow NATO ally, and he did it to push back against this. So we raise this issue, we get people out of prison. The problem is the issue still goes and grows. 80% of the world's population is in a country that has religious persecution. It's the most deadly time in the history of Christendom for you to be a Christian. There's more Christian persecution than any time in the history of mankind. We've got lots of different groups that are kicked out of countries. The Rohingya and the Uyghurs have been kicked out of a dominantly Buddhist country, and China's at war with faith right now that's taking place. China is using high-tech technology now, artificial intelligence systems, to really do oppression, religious oppression. In the future, I think you're going to, and I want to end on this point because you got a lot of great speakers here. The future of oppression isn't going to look like what it looks like now. In the past, you'd see people locked up, killed for being a minority faith or this or that. The future of oppression is you're going to be marginalized in the society. That people are going to have your face, and they're going to know your DNA, and they're going to know who you are. And you're not going to be able to participate. You may get a low social credit score, and then you won't be able to buy or sell. You won't be able to get the apartment you want. You won't be able to go to the education you want. It'll be much more of a marginalization. It won't be just you. It'll be your friends with you. If anybody pings you on your cell phone, that'll be tracked, and they'll get the same low social credit score that you get. These are the systems being modeled and worked on and done now today in China. And we're very concerned that these systems are going to spread, and that's why you're seeing Congress act to put in limits on the technology going from the U.S. into China, limits on technology that's used in these sort of things coming out of China, going to the United States or other countries, because we're very concerned about this use of technology. Technology is amoral. It's neither good nor bad. It's technology. But what you do with it has a big moral component to it. And these are the things, this is why for my radar screen, that area of oppression and that growth of oppression and that nature is one of the most fearful things that I see coming in this space, and we've got to be active, and we are active. We just got to do more.
You know, as a testament to what Ambassador Brownback is saying, he's actually been in crosshairs of the Chinese Communist Party spokespeople recently. And I think I take that as a good sign, right?
I do too.
So let's go to the second part of the question. The question, and actually you spoke to this, Ambassador, is, you know, what more can be done? And each of our speakers have some specific thoughts around this area. So we'll start the discussion there, and then we'll develop further. So Asra, why don't we start with you?
Sure. And just to introduce myself to you all a little bit, I'm going to take you back to this moment that was very pivotal in my life and really relevant to the conversation we're having today. My father came from India in the 1960s, one of the first generation to come and enjoy education freedoms in America. Then my mother came, and then my brother and I. And when I was 10 years old in Piscataway, New Jersey, my dad was about to get on an airplane to go to Libya, because that was where Muammar Gaddafi was now hiring all of these intellectuals. And then he got a phone call from West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia. And they said they had a job for him. He said, well, you better make it fast, because I'm on my way to Libya. Well, my dad went to Morgantown. And in Morgantown, at the airport, he did his interview and he got the job. And I am sitting here today because we made that move west from New Jersey to West Virginia. I am a daughter of India, a Muslim daughter of India, that enjoys democracy and secular governance. But in most of our Muslim countries, we don't have that same liberty. And the freedoms that I've been able to enjoy in America are ones that I could never enjoy in most Muslim countries. The freedom to sit here with my hair free, blowing in the wind outside. The ability to shake your hand, even though you wanted to give me a fist bump today.
Coronavirus.
Yes. This is something like I want everyone in this room to know and appreciate how good we have it here. As we talk about these serious issues overseas, and we have challenges in this country, of course, but what I want to say is with that context, I ended up going off then. I became a Wall Street Journal reporter, and my life was forever changed after the 9/11 attack, when in Karachi, Pakistan, these militants, in the name of my religion, decided that they were going to kill a beautiful, innocent, amazing human being by the name of Danny Pearl because he was Jewish. Because that is ultimately the worst form of oppression, isn't it? You take a person's life, right? It's not just that you put them in jail, that's a serious crime, but to actually kill someone because of their faith. And that's a reality in too much of our world. And what I would hope that our Trump administration would continue to do and do even further is put pressure on these regimes that we have all across the world that are Muslim majority governments that have theocracies. That is what they have done. They have used our religion to define the entire element of their country and the way that people think, so that one fundamental value has been lost that is ultimately a founding principle of this country that allows us to have the freedom of religion that we have, and that is this concept of secular governance. So as we talk about religious freedom and protecting faith, I want us to always stay true to the idea of separation of church and state, because I know in my community, and I brought just a couple examples, we have the serious issue of the Rohingyas, the Uyghur Muslims. But I want to tell you how all of that is exploited is this little piece of propaganda from Linda Sarsour and the movement here in America that wants to exploit our freedoms, using our religious freedoms for political leverage. So in this crowd, I dare to bring this American flag also that says, Muslim Democrats. Don't boo me out of the room. But what we are seeing in this country right now with issues like the Bernie Sanders campaign and the growing anti-Semitism within there is the use and exploitation of our country's freedoms to basically push a political agenda that will deny people more freedoms than we should ever give up. I hope that makes sense, and you understand that I say this because of a love of this country and all that it's been able to give myself, my family, and so many Muslims in this country. We have to protect religious freedom, and our government should continue to press governments across the country to allow even Muslims to have freedom of thought within their boundaries.
Todd, so, you have, I know, a lot of thoughts about how, in another sense, religious liberty, I guess, fares in socialist countries. And we kind of started, Ambassador Brownback started talking about this a little bit earlier. Could you give us a sense?
Well, I first of all, thank you all so very much for coming, and thank you, CPAC, for hosting this very important conference. I believe that religious liberty is the issue that we need to be talking about. I believe that here in America, it was our foundational freedom. And without religious liberty, without the idea, the concept that we are one nation under God, then all of our other freedoms are in jeopardy. And I think up until President Trump was elected and he began to fight alongside of us this war on religious liberty, I feel like, at least in this country, we were heading in a very dangerous direction. In the previous administration, President Obama once said that he wanted to fundamentally transform America, and a lot of folks never really understood what he meant by that. But during the Obama administration, here in this country, there were incredibly draconian attacks on religious liberty, attempts to curtail the way people practice their faith in this country. And as a result, many of our other freedoms, free speech, came under attack, the Second Amendment came under attack, and I believe it's because that the previous administration weakened religious liberty in this country. This is an important issue because we never understood what the fundamental transformation was, but I think we have a pretty clear understanding now as we see one of the major political parties in this country being overrun by socialists. And you see, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, not mankind, but our Creator. In a socialist regime, there's no place for that Creator. There's no place for people of faith. So it's imperative for us to have these conversations so that we can fight for religious liberty. There's no doubt, looking at our founding, any student of history, American history, looking at our founding documents, it's very clear that all of our founding documents were flavored by the beliefs, the Christian and Judeo-Christian beliefs of our founding fathers. No doubt about that. So to take those ideas and those concepts out of the equation, as John Adams so eloquently said, our way of government is wholly inadequate for anybody other than a moral and religious people. And when you take God out of the equation, you get chaos. And that is the warning for us as we go into this great debate of the day, socialism versus capitalism.
So, and Sander, you've been incredibly active in this, particularly in looking at the BDS movement. You have some specific thoughts on how that is actually an assault on religious liberty globally.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it's a great honor to be on such a distinguished panel here with great experts on religious freedom. And I have to be honest, I was not and am not an expert in religious freedom. And I think I was first sort of introduced, of course, I'm proud to be an American, and I have enormous gratitude for the freedom to practice, but I hadn't really understood the whole legal system behind it to enforce this. And the first person to really highlight it for me was my new son-in-law over there. Raise your hand, Asra, who just started a religious liberty clinic at Yale Law School for the first time. So it's a groundbreaking achievement for my new son-in-law. They just got married in August, so.
Grandkids now.
You said it, not him.
I just help in the clan.
Yeah.
So, I was brought up believing that church and state separation is essential to preservation of our democracy and that those should be completely separate. And although I agree that the church should be kept out of the state, there are certain protections that the state must offer to protect the religious freedom. And I think that was part of the importance of the Title VI executive order that President Trump recently issued that now on at least the college campuses, there's going to be an insertion that if you believe in the state of Israel, you cannot be excluded. You can't be harassed. That is actually something new. I think it was astounding that here at CPAC, before the vice president spoke, there was an in-depth interview with David Friedman from the city of David, which is where Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all began. And the fact that that was interjected into the CPAC political discourse, I think, is really a great reflection of the importance that CPAC has on faith and integrating faith into our lives. Not that we should set it apart. Now, we haven't always been so lucky. General Grant issued General Orders number 11 during the Civil War, expelling all Jews from Tennessee Territory. Many people don't know about that. It was quite a blight. And even General Grant, I think, did his repentance and created, I believe, the first religious emissary for religious freedom, Benjamin Franklin Peixoto, which I guess is perhaps a precursor to Ambassador Brownback's position. General Grant, in his letter, wrote, "The United States, knowing no distinction of her own citizens on account of religion or nativity, naturally believe in a civilization the world over, which will secure the same universal liberal views." It's really an astounding letter that General Grant wrote in the appointment of this emissary, that it was for persecution of Romanian Jews. So Jews in Romania were being persecuted. Probably was not exactly in the U.S. national interest, but it's certainly in the U.S. national interest to promote religious freedom across the globe, because studies have shown from Georgetown and others that religious freedom does promote security and stability across the world. I think that's why a lot of the Gulf states now have made such an emphasis, particularly the UAE, not all the Gulf states, but the UAE in particular, has made a great emphasis on bringing together the three Abrahamic religions.
So something that I've been thinking about lately, and this is, speaking to Ambassador Brownback spoke extensively, about the Chinese situation. That's the situation I'm most familiar with. And of course, it's a war on faith, any faith, actually. The thing that we came across, which I found particularly disturbing, is what's described as transformation of people. So basically, attacking, trying to force someone to change their most deeply held religious beliefs. And so we're seeing this today, in these Uyghur, concentration camps, something that was developed over time with over 20 years of when the Falun Gong were being persecuted, to try to transform them. And it also struck me that in other countries, this might be, not a socialist state. It would be conversion, forced conversion into a different religion potentially. So I wanted to, ask the panel, what are you familiar with this, and just the kind of the deeply disturbing nature of this whole scenario.
Yeah, very familiar with it, and it is deeply disturbing, and I think the Chinese probably are the best in the world at it, because they've started it in several places. Now, in Christianity, for instance, in China, they want to rewrite the Bible to make it with Chinese characters. So now, I don't know what that means, but I don't agree with it. Just because write it the language, whatever is there. You can write it in whatever language you want, but don't change the words. The words, these are eternal. We believe these come from God, and this is their faith, and this is their decision to be able to choose that. They're also taking down churches, taking crosses down, or in the front of churches, taking down a picture of Jesus and putting up a picture of Xi Jinping. Taking down scripture from the wall and putting up statements from the Communist Party. That sounds like trying to substitute or change thinking and thinking behavior, and then you've got to sing patriotic songs at the outset and not hymnals, hymns that you're used to singing. This is what they're doing. And it's sort of trying to take it over and saying, okay, we want you to believe in the state, or we want you to believe in the Communist Party or in Xi Jinping. Well, that's not why I'm going to church. That's not what I believe. This is now, if you want to have a Church of China that this is what you want to teach, okay, that's up to your choice to do. You do see this taking place where this sort of trying to manipulate faith in one way or the other. They're, I think, the most aggressive about it. In other places, they really try to manipulate it or co-opt. It's maybe more subtle, but it's a direct-on attack. It won't work. These sort of things have been tried throughout human history. The kingdom of man has often tried to take over the kingdom of God. It's never worked. It may be successful for a little while, and the tanks are stronger than somebody's human flesh standing there. But ultimately, the Roman Empire switched when they were killing Christians earlier. I was just in Romania, and the headquarters for the Orthodox Church there was the Communist Party legislature building. Before it's now it's now owned and operated by the Orthodox Church, and you're going, okay, they ran it for 70 years, but the kingdom of man will not overtake the kingdom of God. It just doesn't happen.
And so for that reason, that's one of the fundamental reasons why I believe that we shouldn't allow people that are in the kingdom of man to use God to govern our laws of our state. So when you think of communism, it's an ideology, right? And so from my vantage point, what we face is another ideology that we call Islamism, which is the ideology of political Islam. So what that basically means is many of you might have heard of organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood, or you think of even a lot of the theocracies like in Iran that are running the state. Those are all not just about the religion of Islam, which my parents taught me was our practice. Theirs is about control of the people. And that's where I think communism and Islamism are very similar. So what is branded as transformation in China to an ideology of communism is the law in too many countries, so that, for example, if you leave the religion, like people can have faith or not have faith in a real free society. But what we face in countries like Bangladesh is attacks then on people who even leave the faith so that they lose their lives. Or, the UAE, as you mentioned, is now finally making breakthroughs and having relationships with even the state of Israel, right? Like there was a point when all these countries would not even allow a conversation to be had with somebody who is from Israel because that violated their idea of what the kingdom of God sanctioned them to do as human beings. And ultimately, to me, that's the most inhumane way you could be practicing your faith, because you're essentially saying, this human being who is from a nation that you oppose does not have, you will not even give that person the simple respect of recognizing their humanity. And that's fundamentally flawed, and that's where I think we can really use our critical thinking to evaluate whether something is transformation or tyranny. Because is this transformation demanding that you think the way that the leaders want you to think? Then that's tyranny. And that's how I think we can tell the difference.
Let's get Todd in there.
I really appreciated what Ambassador Brownback said about marginalizing people of faith. And, my area of expertise really is religious liberty here in the United States. And I think we need to keep a pretty close eye on what's happening here in this country when it comes to attacks on religious liberty. Just a few days ago, there was a CNN town hall meeting, and Don Lemon asked Mayor Pete Buttigieg about about whether or not churches, or not, I'm sorry, not churches, but religious organizations like Christian colleges and charities should lose all federal funding if they discriminate against LGBT Americans. And Mayor Pete said, absolutely. You had former Congressman Robert O'Rourke from Texas just last year say that people who, or churches that discriminate against LGBT people should lose all their tax-exempt status. This is an effort by the government, if the Democrats were to reclaim control in this country, to dictate what churches believe in their church houses. That is absolutely unacceptable here in the United States of America, where we are free to practice our religion without government intrusion and interference. And then just last year in the state of California, you had efforts by the supermajority of Democrats in that state. They wanted to actually dictate what Christian colleges and universities taught regarding doctrine on their campuses. They wanted to dictate the kinds of people Christian colleges and universities could hire, could employ on their campuses. This is, quite frankly, unconstitutional, and praise God, the lawmaker, under pressure, brought back that legislation. But again, when we're looking at what's happening across the world, we need to pay very close attention to what's happening here in this country, because religious liberty is under attack, and we have to be diligent.
Sandra, please.
Well, there's a lot to talk about internationally and domestically. I'd like to speak about both, but I don't want to take up all the time. Domestically, related to what Todd said, there's a problem with the BDS movement. It's spreading like wildfire. And the BDS movement is denying the existence of the Jewish state. And the way that they're doing that is they're misportraying the Jewish state as inherently racist and apartheid. And they're even going as far as saying that the Jewish state is conducting an ethnic cleansing. Now, there's absolutely none of that going on. The ethnic cleansing thing is laughable, and yet this idea has been proffered. And under the prior administration, the BDS movement was able to gain steam. And as it gains steam, there's a belief of an intersectionality with other people that care about the oppressed and make Israel into the oppressor, and the Arabs living in the Palestinian territories are the oppressed. And then it's gone now to where if you are pro-Israel, you are an oppressor and a racist. So at NYU, not too long ago, 51 student groups signed a letter banning 2 pro-Israel groups from anything to do with the other student groups. At University of California, there are Jewish students being excluded from certain activities because they're pro-Israel. Williams and Mary, it's happening actually across the country. It's really quite astounding. Columbia University is voting in early April for BDS, and the fact is BDS is BS. You like that? BDS is BS? So that's the language we're going to start with on the first, hopefully, successful counter
Sandra,
BDS.
could you just explain what BDS is? There's some in the room that probably won't.
So BDS is the notion that there's going to be a nonviolent economic boycott, divestment, and sanction of the state of Israel until they there's the people propagating this movement are out of Ramallah, and they want to do this to destroy the psyche of Jews on campus and to poison the hearts and minds of the campus population. And then many other people are picking up on this, just thinking that, well, we don't like the oppression of the Palestinian people, the so-called oppression of the Palestinian peoples are picking up. But all of this has been propagated by political Islamic movements that are pushing these falsehoods. So when it comes to the liberal sets of the college campuses, it's ending up restricting Jewish students' freedoms on those campuses. And that's why President Trump signed the Title VI executive order to force a protection for Jewish students on campus.
And if I could, I'd like to just add that while it is founded in Ramallah, there's hubs now at Berkeley, at Georgetown, and other universities where the money has flowed in from these Islamist movements that want to ultimately deny people their fundamental rights and deny Israel the right to exist. And so these posters, this is what they use. They use political issues in America then to claim Islamophobia and then oppress others in their own tyranny. Because the effect on campuses is that they've created checkpoints for students. Can you imagine to pretend like they're the kind of checkpoints that a Palestinian would have to go through to get into Israel? And who do they target? Jewish students. So I have here an intern of mine, Madeline Stapel, and I will not forget that a few years ago I went to a breakfast place, and I was really worried about where Madeline would go to college in America, because as a Jewish person, would she face persecution in this country through these movements that have been weaponized? And this is why I just want to give this little warning that they exploit our religious freedoms like a Trojan horse, to come in then and demand freedoms that they won't give in countries that you are courageously fighting to win rights for everyone. And so we really need to pay attention to this, and your efforts are really astounding.
I just want to, just one more point, because the facts do matter a little bit, or people should know the facts. 6% of the Palestinian West Bank population live under Israeli control in Area C. 94% are in areas A and B, which are under control of the Palestinian Authority. So BDS is BS, because the true oppressor of the Palestinian people is the Palestinian Authority, which pays $350 million a year to terrorists and steals from their own people.
Actually, this is a good, sorry, Ambassador, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is that what I really appreciate about what the President, Vice President, Secretary of State are really pushing now is to say that this religious freedom is a fundamental issue. It's a fundamental human right. It's, in football terminology, it's blocking and tackling. You've got to get this one right. And on foreign policy now, instead of subjugating it to a whole bunch of saying, well, we got economic interests, we got defense interests, we got these sort of things, they're bumping it at the top. They're saying, no, you got to get this one right, because these other things start failing and do poorly if you don't. And we push the Islamic countries. So you've got to open up. We opened up on this, and this stuff is starting to get pushed more on Capitol Hill too, where people in Congress are saying, why are we so open and these other guys closed? Let's start leveraging some of this. And so it's really starting to gather more steam as just this fundamental human right that you got to get right, or you won't get any of these others. None of the rest will work.
Which is bipartisan.
It's bipartisan.
Yeah. Because ultimately, the right to think what you want to think and believe what you want to believe in your heart knows no discrimination, right? Everybody should be on board with that. And that's such a fundamental human right. I completely agree.
So we're talking about freedom of conscience, basically here. I think that's how that's described. So, Ambassador Brownback, you started this, what more can be done question in what you were speaking about now. Where do you see things going with the administration?
Very positive, and the president's fully engaged. The vice president recruited me for this job. I was happy to take it. Secretary Pompeo is completely on board. It's broadening out. It's becoming more of a whole of government. Now we're starting to talk about it in our development aid programs. So how can we use some of that to really push for religious freedom? We're talking about it in a number of our different aspects, and it's bounced up the agenda. Instead of being secondary to these other topics or even tertiary, it's no, you've got to deal with this. So the president was recently in India. He had a great trip there, 36 hours, in the private meeting with Modi. He's going, look, you got to take care of the religious freedom issues. You got persecutions taking place in a lot of your population here. didn't talk about it publicly, but privately raised it, and then that gives us more fodder and impetus. And this coalition that I told you about, this Alliance on Religious Freedom, we're now getting a group of countries coming together and saying, you're right, we got to push it. The U.S. leads on this. This is in our DNA. This is in our founding. This is who we are. So, like it or not, we lead on it. And if we don't lead, nobody else does. Okay, that's just the way it is. But now we're finally getting, as we'd say in Western terms, some cavalry coming up here that's to come in and to help out with this in these other nations to push it. And ultimately, we've got to push, and we've got to use teeth. You can't just use words. You got to say, okay, you guys want to keep doing this. We're going to sanction this. We're going to do that. You're not going to be able to trade in this space. We're not going to give you this development aid. That's where this needs to now move. So you use, it's not just words. No, we're acting on it.
And just a quick follow-up. So which countries are part of this developing coalition now?
About half of the European Union. And then you've got the Brazilians, Colombia is engaged in it in South America. We've got several African countries that have joined in it as well, so we're getting some help there. But
Any Muslim countries?
Albania, it's kind of more secularist Muslim
Which everyone
countries.
knows as a Muslim country, right? Yeah, right. But that's good. That's a good
but
start.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But
And
you're
then we
working
also-
on them.
Yeah, we are. Well, we've got a basic standard document that's a declaration that says, I believe in these policies, and you can't join if you don't buy into the founding document. And inclusive in that are that no blasphemy or apostasy laws, and most of the Muslim countries
We all have it, yeah.
Blasphemy or apostasy is that if you say anything against the prophet, it's death penalty.
Or if you leave the faith.
Convert, it
Right.
can be death penalty to another faith. So, and these happen, and then there's a lot of
Yeah.
communal violence. So that's why we didn't get a number at the outset, but
Keep
we
at
got
it.
several.
Keep at it.
And we'll keep pushing on this.
And and to the rest of the panel, feel free. So what more can be done? What would you like to see, Ambassador Brownback be doing in addition to this remarkable work that's been described?
4 more years of the Trump administration would be great because, again, we have a president who is concerned about religious liberty, not just here in this country, but around the world. And that is something that is very unique and is very unusual. And I'm excited about the policies this administration is implementing. And I'm especially excited about Ambassador Brownback and the work that he and his team are doing. And honestly, we have to stay, again, I just cannot stress this enough, we've got to stay focused on what's happening in this country as well. We cannot take our eye off of what's going on here in this country.
Before we open up to some questions, I just want to give everyone a chance for a final word here, especially in this vein.
Frankly, I think it's outstanding what the Trump administration has been doing on religious freedom domestically and internationally as well. And as Ambassador Brownback stated, it's really a matter of upping the game and putting a focus on it. I think one maybe additional suggestion would be something akin to what we did with the Helsinki Accords to promote democratic institutions in the former Soviet Union, that perhaps we could try to tie some kind of technology sharing or trade to some extent with the preservation of religious liberty within the countries that we cooperate with.
And what I would like to really emphasize is that I hope that the Trump administration will always keep in mind the rights of women as we think about human beings, because so often, even with the Obama administration and the Democratic regimes that, I call them regimes in this instance, because they were pushing their ideology of liberalism, from which I come, but refusing it in countries that said, well, actually, because of our religious rights, we don't give women equal rights. And that's a problem. And when you decide, as you articulated just now, that human rights trumps all other issues, then women aren't left behind, right? Right now we have peace treaty happening with the Taliban. And do you think that's going to end well for the women of that country? They're not even at the negotiating table. And so we have to really make sure that religion is never allowed to be used as a vehicle for oppressing half of our population in this world.
Well, so let's open up the floor to some questions. Okay, I saw the first person was the gentleman over there who's waving the magazine. We should have a mic going around. Okay. And I see a few others over here, and I see one over here. Okay, I'm going to try to keep track of everybody.
Do you have any experience, Ambassador Brownback, of the Americans' influence on combating the madrasas over in the Muslim countries? I know that there's a lot of indoctrination. I know it's out of our wheelhouse, but just using influence like developmental aid to encourage them to stop supporting a lot of the madrasas that they're for their children.
Yeah, it's touchy because, if we want somebody here in this country to be able to go to have a religious education that's Jewish or Christian or whatever base, we're kind of, okay, fine. But we hold the educational standards. You've got to also teach, math and science and this. And it's got to be peaceful in its orientation. Some of the madrasas are strictly religious education. The one thing that I have seen in the madrasas that's kind of an interesting one to me is people trying to work through those to expand their educational opportunities. So it's not just on memorization of the Quran, but they're also teaching math and science and reading in that, and to try to get it to broaden. And some work in that area is happening in Pakistan. I know that's been interesting to see, but otherwise I can't cite to you much of anything. And it's a touchy area for us because we're free to educate people on religion. We don't, as long as it's peaceful.
That's a fundamental point, right? The peacefulness. And I just want to just say real quickly that you said in your question it's out of our wheelhouse, but I would argue it's not, because how religion is interpreted and practiced in the world has been a struggle for human beings since the beginning of time, right? Every religion has had that struggle, and Islam is in that struggle right now. I didn't get to mention that I'm part of this movement we started called the Muslim Reform Movement, because we want to challenge the religious education that is violent, because ultimately sanctioning violence is something that we should step in and stop, right? And so in that way, please consider it you're in your wheelhouse also. I think it's everybody's responsibility to have a position on this, because we all have a stake in it.
Okay, my name is Mary. I'm from the Foundation of Pediatric Health. My question today has to do with the usurping of parental rights when it comes to using vaccinations containing aborted fetal cell lines. Currently, California, New York, and several other states have removed the religious exemption to vaccinations. As a pro-lifer, somebody who believes that aborted babies should not be used experimentally and let alone profit off of, we know that 23 vaccines are currently contaminated with human DNA. There's a lot of research saying that this is causing gender confusion when children get a vaccination with 100% human DNA in that vaccination. There's a lot of controversy around this, but most importantly, as a parent, I should have the ultimate choice as to, number one, what I put into my children. I have the right to make all medical decisions for my children. And more importantly, I want to have the right to say no to vaccinations that offend me so deeply, and yet this right is being usurped across the country. This doesn't only affect Christians, it affects people who don't eat pork, for example, Jewish people, Muslim. There are vaccines made with pork and swine parts. So this is a huge issue, and I think that it's being ignored by the media, and there are millions of people that I represent right now today who are very concerned about this.
Does anyone want to tackle that one? It's a bit out of our wheelhouse, so to speak, but save it for another one. I think we're going to save that one. It's the gentleman behind, and then it'll be this young lady over here. Yeah.
Even though this is not a government question, government-related question, has anyone considered moving toward divestment from China as far as the religious oppression issues and also, of course, economic and military issues? It was used very effectively against South Africa. I just wondered if you have any thoughts along those lines.
I don't have any particular directed thoughts. I listed for you a couple of things that the Congress and the administration has done of blocking technology from coming out of China to other places, particularly ours, or ours from here to there. That's a form of, I don't know if we want to call it divestment, but it has a big economic impact. Our engagement on Huawei and pushing back against Huawei, while not a religious freedom issue, is a big technology issue, and concern that whatever Huawei puts in will ultimately be siphoned off and looked at back in Beijing is a deep concern, technology-wise, but I also think it has religious freedom aspects to it too, because it's this sort of oppression that I've talked about and using of technology to get that done. I haven't heard of groups stepping up to push this. I wouldn't be surprised if things like that would start to happen if this war on faith continues in China.
I'm just going to comment briefly on the Huawei point, because this is something that's in our wheelhouse. You can think of Huawei as kind of the tip of the spear of the Chinese Communist Party effort to control the world, actually, right? Because it's this technology, 5G technology, will run everything in the future, right? The communication between every device and every other device. And imagine being able to control that and what that would mean. Ambassador Brownback mentioned what was happening in terms of the social credit system in Xinjiang, and that's that exact same technology which could be deployed through Huawei wherever it operates. That's just, sorry to take the mic here, but that's the reality. This right here.
Hi, I'm Penny Starr with Breitbart News. We talked about anti-Semitism that's been growing in this country, and we've talked about college campuses, but as someone who covers Congress, I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on what seems to be happening with lawmakers in our country. And I go to press conferences all the time where Linda Sauer and other people are really trying to have a great influence on what's happening in Congress and in our
If
capital.
I could, I'll answer it. What's a good Muslim journalist like me writing for a Jewish publication like Jewish Journal this week? It was to write literally a piece about Bernie Sanders' anti-Semitism problem. Because this week, for example, Bernie Sanders says that he refuses to go to APAC because of the people that they have speak that he accuses of bigotry. But last year, I went to the Islamic Society conference that he did speak at, where he was cheered and applauded with a lot of the language of the BDS movement. And around me were people and books being sold that are all about bigotry. That was about, literally I pulled up a book from the bazaar for $39.99 that preached jihad against the Jews and the Christians and the Zoroastrians, because they got to go that far, to include them. That's religious persecution, right? So those are ideas that we have to defeat. And that's exactly to the point that I've observed and that I wanted to share with you all, is that they are exploiting the opportunities in America to enter into our political system with their ideology of political Islam that ultimately treats people of other faiths as second, third, fourth-class citizens, and oftentimes then women as third-class citizens also. And so it's their power that is having growing influence in this country. And I, sure enough, as one of my illustrations brought with me the bumper sticker I found there that week for Bernie for 2020, because they have penetrated into our Democratic National Committee and the Democratic apparatus with their intolerant ideas because of our freedoms. And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to be very protective of the point that you made earlier of the hierarchy, you know, the value of every human being, so that you don't say that somebody from Israel, it doesn't deserve humanity, you know, which is one of the arguments that Bernie Sanders surrogates are pushing forward. And so this is a real concern of mine as a citizen of this country.
So I'm getting the signal that we have to finish up. I just wanted to see if anyone from the panel has any final word.
If I could just, please get engaged in this. You're an activist community or you wouldn't be here at this. So if you see something or some group that is involved in this, please touch base with them. Please get involved. Please bring it into your community. If you want people that have been persecuted for their faith to speak to a group that you have, there are plenty around. Our office and many other groups can help you find them. I do hope you get active in this field. I deal with internationally. Todd's got a good point about being vigilant domestically on this, because these are really fundamental fights. They're very fundamental, and so a lot of times people kind of think that's bigger than me, but that's how we deal with things in this country, is people get engaged and they start pushing back on something. And you can do it. And one person does matter, particularly if they got passion and motivation about it. You can make a difference on it. So I really hope you will engage on these topics.
So please join me in giving a big, big warm hand for the panel.